Welcome back to another very exciting tutorial here at the PhotoshopTrainingChannel.com. My name is Jesus Ramirez and you can find me on Instagram at JRFromPTC. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create the Spider-Man Homecoming text in Photoshop. We will focus on using a layer style stacking technique to create this 3D text effect. If this is your first time at the Photoshop Training Channel, then don't forget to subscribe. Okay, let's get started. First, we're going to create a new document. You can click on the Create New button. We're going to File and New. I'm going to click on Create, and we're going to create a document that is 1920 by 1080 with a resolution of 72, RGB color mode. The background color is really not that important, but I have it set to white. And for color profile, we're going to use Adobe RGB 1998. And I'm going to click on Create. The first step in creating this design is creating a background. So I'm going to click on the new adjustment layer icon and select solid color. I like using solid colors for my backgrounds. We're going to use a color that I predefined, and that is 211, 77, and 25, which is that blue you see there. And then I'm going to press OK. This step is not necessary, but if you like, you can delete the layer mask. I like deleting the layer mask that I'm not using. I'm going to rename this layer background. And the original background, I'm just going to delete that. So I'm going to click on it and drag it over into the trash icon. Then we're going to create a glow in the center of the background. And we're going to use a non-destructive technique for that. So I'm going to create one more adjustment layer, a gradient. We're going to change the style to radial. And now we're going to change the color so that the circle in the middle is white. And the gradient that we're using is a gradient that goes from foreground color to transparent. Currently, our foreground color is black, so our black color stops show here. The stops on the top control the opacity. Notice that this one is set to 100, and this one is set to 0. I'm going to double click on the color stop at the bottom to bring up the color picker and set that to white, and I'll do the same for both color stops. Now they're both white. I'm going to press OK. I'm going to press OK one more time, and I'm going to change the blending mode to overlay to create that effect there. I'm also going to delete the layer mask since we don't need it. I'm going to rename this layer Glow. To keep things organized, I'm going to put these two layers into a group. With the top layer selected, I'm going to hold Shift and click on the bottom one to select both. Then I'm going to press Ctrl G, Command G on the Mac to put that into a group. And I'm going to call this group background. Now we're going to work with the text. So I'm going to click on the type tool and we're going to use a font called Good Times. It's a font from Adobe Typekit. If you have a full version to the Creative Cloud, then you have access to Typekit and you can download this font. To do so, you can click on this Add Fonts from Typekit icon, which will open up Adobe Typekit, and you can just search for Good Times and download it into your version of the Creative Cloud. If you don't have the full version of the Creative Cloud, that's okay. You can use any other font that you like. The font type is really not that important. What's important in this tutorial is the layer style stacking technique that we're going to learn to create the effect. So you can use any font that you like, really. So I'm going to click on Good Times, and I'm just going to type in the center of the canvas, spider text. Then I can press Control Enter. That's Command Return on the Mac. And we can resize the text by clicking on the Move tool and pressing Control T, Command T to transform, and then clicking and dragging from the corner handle while holding Shift to keep the text constrained and not distorted. Once you get the text to the size that you want, you can hit Enter. And now it's time to center the text in the canvas. One of the easiest ways to do so is by pressing Ctrl A, Command A on the Mac to make a selection around the canvas. Then, with the Move tool selected, in the options bar, you can click on the Align Vertical Centers icon and on the Align Horizontal Centers icon, and that will center the text in the canvas. I'm going to press Ctrl D, Command D to deselect. Now that the text is centered, we're going to work on applying the layer styles to give this text the Spider-Man effect that we're going for. So first, I'm going to select the text layer and I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to press Ctrl J, Command J on the Mac. Then I'm going to disable this duplicate copy by clicking on the eye icon and work on the original text layer. I'm going to double click to the side of the layer to bring up the layer style window. Then I'm going to click on gradient overlay. So I'm going to click on the gradient to bring up the gradient editor, and then click on this stop on the right and make this yellow. The color that we're going for is hue of 48, saturation of 67, and brightness of 100. Then press OK. And notice that this colors the top of the text. Now we're going to work on the bottom by double clicking on this color stop. And we're going to change this to a different yellow, which is a hue of 55, saturation of 100, and brightness of 78. I'm going to press OK. I'm going to press OK one more time. And just make sure that angle is 90 degrees, scale is 100, blending mode is normal, opacity is 100. And now we're going to work on the next step, which is creating a stroke. Now, before I do so, I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to zoom in so that you can see what we're doing. So I'm going to get really close into the text here. Then I'm going to double click on the effects label to bring up the layer style window. Then I'm going to click on stroke. This creates an outline around the text. And what we want to do is set the size to 4 pixels. Make sure position is inside. And under opacity, you need to make sure that you bring that down to 0% and watch what happens. Anything that was red is going to become invisible. So we're essentially making the text thinner, and that's what we want to do. We're making it thinner by 4 pixels. Then we're going to press OK, and that is the result there. Now I'm going to click on this up arrow to collapse the layer style so it gives us a little more room to work with. Then I'm going to enable the layer on top of that, and we're going to work on this layer. But before we do so, I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to press Ctrl-J, Command-J on the Mac. So now we're going to work with the text copy and disable copy number 2. Now, before we do any adjustments, we got to make sure that we can see the layer below it, but that we can also see the styles that we apply. With the fill command, if you bring that down to 0%, you will see that when we add a layer style, the layer style will show. So if we add an inner shadow layer style, those pixels will appear. I'm going to click on blending options. Notice that if we bring the fill opacity back up to 100%, the original pixels show up. So what the fill allows you to do in a layer style is to hide the original pixels, but only reveal the pixels that are created through the layer styles, which is what we want. So we're going to work with the inner shadow. We're going to change the color of this inner shadow to red, and the red that we're looking for is 0 hue, 94 of saturation, and a brightness of 56. Then I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to change the blending mode to pin light. Next step is to adjust the distance so that we can actually see it. So I'm going to click and drag this over to the right to about 10 pixels. Choke 0. Size is pretty good, but I'm going to bring it down just a little bit at 6. Now we're going to change the position a little bit. So I'm going to uncheck Use Global Light. And I'm going to click and drag this over to the left, right at about 111 degrees. Then I'm going to increase the opacity to about 50% and press OK. So this is the technique that we're going to use. We're going to start stacking layers that contain the same content with the fill set to 0 so that we can apply multiple layer styles, and it's going to create that 3D effect that you saw in the introduction. Next, we're going to click on this layer, and I'm going to duplicate it by pressing Ctrl-J, Command-J on the Mac. And I'm going to enable the spider text copy number 2. And we're going to double click to the side of the layer to bring up the layer style window. And the first effect that we're going to apply is a stroke. But before we do that, we of course have to bring the fill down to 0 so that we can see the layers underneath. So I'm going to click on stroke, and we're going to use a stroke that has 4 pixels because we use 4 pixels in the first step to make this text thinner. So we want to bring it back right to where it originally was. So we're going to use the position of inside at 4 pixels to reveal that text because we hit it with the opacity in the first step. Then we're going to change the color to red, and the red that we're going to use is a hue of 359, saturation of 84, and brightness of 83, and press OK. So notice now that that outline filled in what we lost in the previous example. Then we can add a bevel and emboss. And what we're going to do here is change the style to stroke emboss. Change the technique to chisel hard. And we're going to increase the depth a little bit to about 115. Direction up, size 7 is good. and we're going to soften this up to about 12 pixels or so. We're going to use a global light of 124 degrees over 32. We're going to change the blending mode on the highlight to overlay. Maybe you bring down the opacity just a tiny bit to about 40%. And we'll leave the blending mode at multiply for shadows, but bring it down to 30%. Then we're going to adjust the contour of the bevel. So I'm going to click on this down pointing arrow and select this one here that has 2 peaks, but we're going to edit it a little bit. So I'm going to click on it to bring up the contour editor. So I'm just going to click and drag this point out, click and drag this one out as well. But then this top one, I'm going to click and drag it down. And we only really need 5 points, the 3 at the bottom and these 2 on top. I'm sort of going to keep the curves from going up that line you see there. So this is more or less the shape that you're trying to create, sort of an M, and then press OK. So you can see how the 3D effect is looking on here. So that's before and after. We're going to add another inner shadow, and this inner shadow will be black with a blending mode set to linear light. Opacity, we're going to bump it up to 100%. And we're going to bring down the distance to 3 pixels. We're going to increase the choke to 48%. And we're going to increase the size to 12 or 11 pixels. I think in this case, 11 pixels works better. Now we need to add a pattern to this design. And I'm going to press OK for now. And we're going to come back into that same layer style. But before we do so, I'm going to show you the pattern that we're going to use. So I'm going to open up that file now. And this is the file here. It's a pattern that I made really quickly in Photoshop, and it can also be done in Illustrator, of course. So essentially it's this background layer and this pattern layer, and this is the effect that you create, and it's a seamless texture. You can download this for free on my website, or you can create your own. But once you have your pattern created, what you need to do is make sure that you have a white outline with a transparent background, and make sure that it's a seamless pattern so you can't see the seams once we turn it into a Photoshop pattern. So I'm going to disable this layer, keep the pattern layer on, just the white part. Then I'm going to go into Edit, Define Pattern, and you can just call it Spider Texture. And I'll capitalize the first word, remove the hyphen, and remove the extension, and just press OK. You can then close this file. And we're back in our working document, and we can just double click on the effects label on the spider text copy, the one that added all those effects you see there. And we're going to add a pattern overlay. And by default, that pattern should be selected. If it's not, you can just click on that down pointing arrow, and it should be the last one on your list. And we need to make some adjustments, of course. First of all, we're going to bring the scale down. It's way too big. So why don't we just try 6%? And then we're going to change the blending mode to vivid light. And we're going to reduce the opacity to about 8%. And we're going to press OK. So these are the different layers that we stacked on top of each other with layer styles to create this effect. What we're going to do now is create a highlight around the red stroke, but we're actually going to use a shadow for that. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm going to enable the text copy number 3. We do not need to make a duplicate. So I'm going to double click to the side of the layer to bring up the layer style window. And I'll bring down the fill opacity to 0%. And obviously these styles give you shadows and glows. But just because the word shadow or glow is on there, it doesn't mean that you have to use it for that purpose. For example, I can click on inner shadow, change the color to white, in the blending mode to color dodge, and now this can be a highlight. I'm going to bring down the opacity just a little bit to about maybe 70%. And I'm going to change the angle to 90%. So it's straight on from the top. Bring the size and choke down to 0. And the distance, we'll just bring it down to 2. So now we have that highlight on top of the text here. So that's before and after. So that makes it look more 3D just by adding that simple highlight on top. Then press OK when you're done. And now we have the main text. I'm going to double click on the hand tool so we can see the entire text. And I'm going to select the top layer, hold Shift, click on the bottom layer, and press Ctrl-G, Command-G on the Mac to put that into a group. And I'll call this text. And what we're going to do now is create the extrusion to make this text look more 3D. So I'm going to open up the text group, and I'm going to Control, Command, click on any one of these text icons, which is going to make a selection around the text layer. Then I'm going to collapse that group, go and click on the background, click on the new layer icon to create a blank layer in between the text and the background. Then fill that with black. Black is my foreground color, so I can press Alt backspace. That's Option backspace on the Mac. If I disable the text layer, you will see that I have black text in the back. And there is a selection around it. What I'm going to do now is press Ctrl T, Command T to transform. And I'm going to scale this down just a tiny little bit. I'm going to hold Shift and Alt, click and drag, and just scale it down just a tiny bit. Notice that I have 99.30%. That's what I want. Something very small like that. Then I'm going to press the down key on the keyboard 2 times, just to bring it down just a little bit. I'm going to hit Enter. Then I'm going to enable the original text layer. The selection is still active around my new layer. And I'm going to hold Control, Alt, Shift, and T. That's Command, Option, Shift, T on the Mac. And watch what happens. I'm going to do that several times. I'm holding the 3 modifier keys and then pressing T. Notice how that's repeating that step of making the text smaller and pushing it down. And it's keeping it all in one layer because of the selection and because of the keyboard shortcut that I'm doing. So that's redoing the last transformation. And you can decide how thick the text is going to look. Once you're done, you can press Ctrl D, Command D to deselect, and you can see the extrusion and the foreground. Now, before we do anything else, I'm going to rename this layer to Extrusion. And we're going to apply a layer style. So I'm going to double click to the side of the layer and click on Color Overlay. And we want a blending mode of normal, opacity of 100%. And the color that we want is hue of 2, saturation of 67, and a brightness of 18. And press OK. And that gives us that effect that you see there. I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to zoom in just so that you can see what's going on a little bit better as I'm making the following adjustments. So I'll try to fit the entire text there on screen for you. Then I'm going to double click on the effects label on the extrusion layer, and I'm going to click on bevel and emboss. And what we're going to do is try to make this extrusion look a little more 3-dimensional. So the first thing that we're going to do is change this to inner bevel and change this to chisel soft and adjust the depth. But you really can't see what's going on, so let's change the colors first. We're going to change the highlight blending mode to normal, and we're going to make this blue. A blue sort of like this one, and we'll go with 218, 63, and 73, and then press OK. Increase the opacity to 80%. Bring down the shadow opacity to 0%, and I'm going to uncheck Use Global Light, and I'm also going to change the gloss contour. And I'm going to get rid of these 2 points. And this center point, I'm just going to drag up like so. So we can get that effect you see there. And I'm going to press OK. And I'm going to change the angle to -90 and the altitude to 42. Then I can adjust the softness. And maybe increase the depth just a little more. And the size. In this case, 13 pixels work, and that looks pretty good. At this point, you can continue making any other refinements that you think you may need. For example, you can continue to adjust maybe the location of the lighting to get better highlights that match the text that you have. You don't necessarily have to use exactly the same values that I use. Whatever values make your text look better, that's what you should use. So these are just general values to get you started. I'm going to press OK now, and I'm going to zoom in just so that we could see what we have here. And I'm going to zoom in to 100% actually. And now that I'm looking at 100%, I think that the highlight looks a little dull. So maybe I can change that. So I'm going to open up the text. I got to find my highlight layer, which I think is the very top one here. And that's the one. I'm going to open it up. And it was created by using that inner shadow. And I can adjust it by bringing down the opacity, or maybe even changing the blending mode to something like overlay. But I think I like color dodge better. And you can adjust it maybe by changing the color a little bit. Just give it just a little bit of red in there so that doesn't look so white on top there. So something like that. And you can, of course, adjust any of the other settings that you like to get the effect that you're going for. In this example, I think this is good enough. I'm going to collapse the text here. So we have the background, and I'll fit this to screen by clicking on the hand tool, the text, and the extrusion. So as you can see, by adding different layers with different layer styles, you can create pretty interesting 3D text effects. To finalize this effect, I'm going to hold Shift, click on the top layer, then click on the bottom one to select them all. I'm going to right click to the right side of any of those layers and click on Convert to Smart Object. That way I can apply a non-destructive filter. And the filter that I'm going to apply is a camera raw filter. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to zoom in to 100%. And I'm going to click on this icon here for details, and I'm just going to sharpen it just a little bit. So that's before and after, just a subtle effect, but I think it works. And also, I'm going to click on the effects icon and add just a tiny little bit of grain, just so things are not so soft. Then I'm going to add some vignetting, and for that I'll zoom out so that you can see what's going on. Zoom out, and I can increase the vignette. So right about there, and then press OK. So that's before and after. It's a subtle effect, but I think it improves on the image. If you like to add the Photoshop text that you saw in the bottom on the introduction, I'm just going to double click on the smart object and show you how to add that. I'm going to click on the text tool, click here. The font that we're going to use is Market OT, also from Adobe Typekit. So let me just find that. It's down here, Market OT, or you can just type it up here, Market OT, there it is. And I can just type the word Photoshop and press Control Enter, Command Enter on the Mac, Control T to transform, and you can scale this up just as you did the other text earlier. You can also double click on the layer here to highlight it, click on the characters panel icon, and then click on this icon here to make them all capital letters. And you can accept the changes by pressing Control Enter or clicking on this check mark. Then with that layer selected, you can click on this icon and press OK to arc the text. And you can adjust how much of an arc that text is going to have. So maybe something like that. And press OK. And I'm going to click on the Move tool and just center it and bring it down a little bit. And maybe I can select all the layers and just push them up so that they're centered. Right about here. I'm going to press Control Enter, Command Enter on the Mac. And if I press Control S, Command S to save this smart object, close that tab, you'll see the updated version here in the final document. And this is the final effect. If you create something using this tutorial or any other of my tutorials, then don't forget to share it on Instagram with the hashtag PTCVids. I would love to see your work. If you enjoyed this tutorial, click on that like button and please share it with a friend. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.